Dr. Sarah Chun stared out the small window of the transport ship as Kepler Station came into view. The massive structure looked like a dark metal flower blooming in space, its arms stretching out in all directions. Each arm held different sections of what the galaxy called the most dangerous zoo and known space. Sarah pressed her face closer to the cold glass. After 6 years of studying alien life forms on Earth, she had dreamed of working with creatures from across the galaxy. But as the ship docked with the station, her excitement mixed with bitter disappointment. She was not here as a scientist. She was here as a janitor. The docking bay doors hissed open, and Sarah grabbed her single bag of belongings. The gravity felt heavier than Earth normal as she stepped onto the station. The air tasted metallic and carried strange smells she could not identify. A tall, insect-like creature waited for her at the entrance. Its body was covered in dark green shell-like skin, and its forearms moved in quick, nervous gestures. 2 large black eyes studied Sarah with obvious dislike. "You are the new human maintenance worker," the creature said in perfect English, though its voice sounded like grinding metal. "I am Commander Zithrak of the Vrek species. You will follow me and listen carefully." Sarah wanted to correct him about her title, but she had learned to keep quiet during her first weeks in galactic society. Humans were new members of the Galactic Conservation Alliance, and they were not respected. Most alien races saw humans as barely civilized creatures who had almost destroyed their own planet before learning to travel between stars. Commander Zithrak led her through long corridors lined with thick metal walls. Through small windows, Sarah could see glimpses of the creatures housed in the different sections. A massive bird-like animal with 6 wings and scales instead of feathers flew in circles in one enclosure. In another, something that looked like a living crystal formation pulsed with different colors. The Galactic Conservation Alliance has spent thousands of years collecting the most dangerous predators from across known space, Zithrak explained as they walked. These creatures cannot be tamed or controlled. They exist here only because we have the technology to contain them. Sarah nodded, but inside she felt frustrated. She had studied animal behavior for most of her adult life. She had worked with wolves, sharks, and even the giant bears of Alaska. Every creature could be understood if you took the time to learn about it. They stopped in front of a large door marked with warning symbols in dozens of alien languages. Zithrak's 4 hands moved over a complex control panel, and the door slid open to reveal a viewing chamber. "This is our most prized specimen," Zithrak said with what Sarah thought might be pride. "The creature you humans would probably call the Shadow Maw." Sarah stepped up to the viewing window and gasped. The enclosure beyond was larger than a football field, but she could see almost nothing inside it. The space seemed to be filled with moving darkness that shifted and flowed like liquid. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of something solid within the shadows, a flash of what might have been teeth, or the outline of something huge moving through the black mist. "It comes from the dark matter storms near the Void Nebula," Zithrak continued. "For 300 years, we have kept it contained in this cell. It has killed every researcher who tried to study it. The creature can phase through most solid matter, making it nearly impossible to handle safely." As if responding to their conversation, the darkness in the cell suddenly pressed against the viewing window. Sarah jumped back as something that might have been a face appeared in the shadows, or perhaps it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. The containment field around its cell uses the most advanced technology in the galaxy, Zithrak said. "Without it, the creature would tear through this station in minutes. It knows only violence and rage." Sarah watched the shifting darkness and felt a chill run down her spine. But mixed with her fear was curiosity. What kind of environment had this creature evolved in? What did it eat? How did it communicate with others of its kind? Your duties will not involve the high security sections, Zithrak said, interrupting her thoughts. Humans are assigned to basic maintenance tasks only. You will clean the lower threat enclosures, deliver food through automated systems, and perform simple repairs. You will not interact directly with any specimens. They left the viewing chamber and continued through the station. Sarah saw dozens of other enclosures holding creatures she could barely imagine. Some looked like animals from Earth, but with too many legs or eyes in the wrong places. Others seemed to be made of pure energy or liquid metal. Her living quarters were small but clean, with a narrow bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out at the stars. Zithrak left her with a thick manual of safety procedures and a schedule of her daily tasks. That night, Sarah sat on her bed and read through the manual. Most of it was warnings about what not to touch, where not to go, and which creatures to avoid at all costs. Every page reminded her that humans were only trusted with the most basic jobs. But as she read, Sarah began to notice something interesting. The descriptions of the creatures focused only on how dangerous they were. There was almost nothing about their natural behaviors, their social structures, or their basic needs. It was as if the Vrex and other alien races saw these creatures only as problems to be contained, not as living beings to be understood. Sarah thought about the Shadow Maw and the way the darkness had pressed against the viewing window. Had it been trying to attack, or had it simply been curious about the visitors outside its cell? After working with traumatized animals on Earth, she knew that aggressive behavior often came from fear, pain, or confusion. She closed the manual and looked out her small window at the stars. Tomorrow she would begin her work as a maintenance person, cleaning cages and delivering food. But she was still a scientist, and scientists ask questions. Even if the Vrex did not want her to study the creatures, she could still observe them. And maybe, if she was careful and patient, she might learn something that the galaxy's greatest experts had missed. The Shadow Maw had survived 300 years in captivity. Something that dangerous and that intelligent had to be more than just a mindless killing machine. Sarah fell asleep, wondering what secrets the creature might be hiding in its cell of moving darkness. Sarah's first week on Kepler Station followed a strict routine. She woke at 6 in the morning, ate breakfast in the small cafeteria with the other human workers, and then began her cleaning duties in the lower security sections. The other humans on the station were mostly janitors and food service workers like herself. They seemed content to follow their schedules and avoid thinking about the dangerous creatures housed just a few levels above them. During meals, they talked about sports broadcasts from Earth, letters from family, and how many months were left on their contracts. But Sarah could not stop thinking about the animals her assigned section housed, what the Vrex called minor threats. These included a pack of six-legged wolf-like creatures from a high-gravity planet, a family of small reptiles that could change color, and something that looked like a giant octopus but lived in a tank filled with liquid methane instead of water. As Sarah cleaned their enclosures and delivered their food, she began to notice things that bothered her. The wolf creatures paced the same path around their cage every day, wearing a groove in the metal floor. The color-changing reptiles stayed the same dull brown color all the time, never showing the bright patterns that their information file said were normal for their species. The octopus thing spent most of its time hiding in one corner of its tank, its tentacles wrapped tightly around its body. Sarah had seen similar behaviors in animals on Earth. These were signs of stress, boredom, and depression. The creatures were not thriving in their enclosures. They were just surviving. After 2 weeks on the station, Sarah finally got permission to enter the high security sections as part of a deep cleaning crew. The work was dangerous and required her to wear a full protective suit, but it gave her a chance to see the most dangerous specimens up close. The first time she saw the Shadow Maw's enclosure from the inside, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The cell was enormous, but completely empty except for the creature itself. The walls were bare metal, and harsh white lights blazed down from the ceiling 24 hours a day. The Shadow Maw itself was more terrifying than she had imagined. It moved through its cell like a living storm cloud, sometimes solid, sometimes seeming to dissolve into pure darkness. When it was solid, Sarah could see glimpses of a body that was roughly humanoid but much larger, with long arms that ended in claws and a head that seemed to have too many angles. But as Sarah watched while scrubbing the observation windows, she began to see patterns in the creature's movement. Every few hours, it would retreat to the same corner of its cell and try to create a small area of deeper shadow. The bright lights always defeated these attempts, but the Shadow Maw kept trying. During the station's night cycle, an artificial period when some of the lights were dimmed for the comfort of the staff, the creature became noticeably calmer. It moved more slowly and spent longer periods in its solid form. When the lights returned to full brightness for the day cycle, its agitation increased dramatically. Sarah started keeping a notebook hidden in her cleaning supplies. She recorded when the Shadow Maw was most active, when it seemed calm, and when it showed signs of what she was beginning to recognize as distress. The breakthrough came during her third week of observations. Sarah was cleaning the corridor outside the high-security cells when she heard a sound she had never noticed before. It was very faint, almost below the range of human hearing, but it sounded like singing. Following the sound, she traced it to the Shadow Maw cell. The creature was in its corner again, trying to create a patch of darkness, and the sound was coming from it. When Sarah listened carefully, she could hear a pattern. The same series of low notes repeated over and over. It reminded her of something, but she could not place what. Then, watching through the observation window, she saw the Shadow Maw suddenly phase through the cell wall and back again, as if testing its prison. As it did this, the electromagnetic containment field flared brighter, and the creature immediately stopped its singing and recoiled. That was when Sarah realized what the sound reminded her of. It was like the distress calls she had heard from whales in the ocean research centers back on Earth. The Shadow Maw was not just randomly violent, it was trying to communicate. And it was in pain. Sarah spent the next week watching more carefully. She noticed that the creature's phasing ability seemed connected to its emotional state. When it was calm, it remained mostly solid. When the containment field activated or the lights became brighter, it would phase in and out rapidly, like a cornered animal looking for escape. Most importantly, she observed that the creature's attacks on researchers in the past might not have been attacks at all. Every time the creature faced toward the observation windows or the cell door, it happened when someone was present. Sarah began to wonder if the Shadow Maw was actually trying to reach the people outside its cell, not hurt them. Armed with her observations, Sarah decided to write a formal report. She spent an entire evening putting together her findings, including detailed charts of the creature's behavior patterns and her theories about its distress. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Commander Zithrak. The Wreck's commander was clearly annoyed to be interrupted by a human janitor, but he agreed to look at her report. Sarah sat nervously in Zithrak's office while he read through her notes with his large black eyes. The office was decorated with pictures of successful captures and trophies from dangerous expeditions. Behind his desk hung a large photograph of the Shadow Maw in its cell, labeled The Unconquerable. "This is interesting," Zithrak said finally, setting down the report. "But it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of xenobiology." Sarah felt her heart sink, but she forced herself to speak. "Commander, I have 15 years of experience studying animal behavior. These patterns are consistent with psychological distress, not inherent aggression." Zithrak's mandibles clicked together, and what Sarah had learned was the Wreck's equivalent of laughter. "Dr. Chun, you are applying primitive human concepts to an advanced alien intelligence. This is exactly the kind of anthropomorphism that makes your species unsuitable for serious scientific work. But the evidence clearly shows. Sarah began. The evidence shows that a human janitor with no understanding of advanced xenobiology is seeing patterns that do not exist. Zithrak interrupted. The Shadow Maw has been studied by the greatest minds in the galaxy for 3 centuries. If it could be understood or helped, we would have discovered that long ago. He handed the report back to her. I suggest you focus on your assigned duties and leave the science to those qualified to perform it. Sarah left the office feeling frustrated and angry, but not defeated. She knew what she had seen, and she knew the Shadow Maw was more than just a mindless monster. If the Vrex were too arrogant to listen to her, she would have to find another way to help the creature. That night, as she looked out her window at the stars, Sarah made a decision. She was going to continue her observations, with or without permission. And if she was right about the Shadow Maw's condition, she was going to find a way to help it, even if it meant risking her job, her safety, and her life. Sarah's opportunity came 3 weeks after her failed meeting with Commander Zithrak. A maintenance alert flashed on her work tablet. The lighting system in the high-security wing needed repairs, and she was assigned to assist the technical crew. The repair work gave her legitimate access to the Shadow Maw's cell for the first time since writing her report. As the Rex technicians worked on the main lighting controls, Sarah found herself alone near the creature's enclosure. The Shadow Maw was in its corner again, that same spot where it always tried to create darkness. Sarah watched as it repeatedly attempted to gather shadows around itself, only to have the harsh light scatter them. Each failure seemed to make the creature more agitated. Sarah looked around to make sure no one was watching, then quickly opened her toolkit. Among her cleaning supplies, she had hidden a small handheld light meter, a device she had borrowed from the station's equipment. Stores weeks ago. She held the meter close to the containment field and immediately understood why the creature was suffering. The electromagnetic field was not just containing the Shadow Maw, it was generating radiation across a spectrum that would be extremely painful to a being evolved. In the dark matter storms of space, it was like keeping a human in a room filled with sirens and strobe lights 24 hours a day. No wonder the creature seemed angry and violent. It was being slowly tortured. When the other workers left for their lunch break, Sarah made her decision. She could not adjust the main containment field that would trigger alarms throughout the station, but she could make small changes to the environmental controls. Working quickly, she accessed the lighting panel for the Shadow Maw cell. The system was more complex than Earth technology, but the basic principles were the same. She found the intensity controls and carefully reduced the brightness by 15%. Then she programmed a simple day-night cycle, something the cell had never had before. Next, she looked at the ventilation system. The cell's air recycling was set to maximum efficiency, creating constant air movement. Sarah adjusted it to provide periods of stillness, remembering how the creature seemed calmer when it could create small areas of shadow. The changes were small enough that they might not be noticed immediately, but they should provide some relief for the Shadow Maw. Sarah finished her work and rejoined the repair crew, her heart racing with nervous excitement. Over the next few days, Sarah watched for any changes in the creature's behavior. The results were dramatic. During the dimmer periods she had programmed, the Shadow Maw remained solid for much longer periods. It stopped its endless pacing and instead began exploring different areas of its cell. Most remarkably, the creature started creating what looked like art, using its claws. It scratched patterns into the metal walls, complex geometric designs that reminded Sarah of the mathematical concepts she had studied in college. These were not the random marks of a mindless animal. They were the work of an intelligent being expressing itself. Sarah began bringing small objects. During her cleaning shifts, a piece of smooth metal, a length of fiber optic cable that would glow softly in the dark, even a small mirror. She left them where the creature could find them, always making sure to remove them before the next inspection. To her amazement, the Shadow Maw began incorporating these objects into its wall patterns. It seemed to understand that Sarah was trying to help, because it always left the objects where she could retrieve them safely. But Sarah's modifications had not gone unnoticed. During her 4th week of secret changes, warning lights began flashing throughout the high-security wing. Alarms blared, and automated systems announced a containment field fluctuation in Cell 7, the Shadow Maw's prison. Commander Zithrak arrived with a full security team, just as Sarah was trying to escape the area with her cleaning card. His 4 eyes fixed on her with unmistakable suspicion. "Explain your presence here during a security alert," he demanded. Sarah's mouth went dry. "I was just finishing my assigned cleaning duties, Commander. I heard the alarms and was trying to get to safety." Zithrak studied her for a long moment, then ordered his security team to scan the entire area. They found the modified lighting controls within minutes. "Someone has tampered with the environmental systems," one of the security officers reported. "The changes appear to be designed to make the creature more comfortable." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach as Zithrak turned back to her. "You were specifically told to avoid interfering with our specimens. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "Commander, if you would just look at the behavioral data." Silence. Zithrak's voice was sharp enough to cut metal. "Your primitive meddling has disrupted 3 centuries of careful containment procedures. The creature is now more active and alert than it has been in decades. You have made it more dangerous, not less." Sarah wanted to argue, to explain that the creature was healthier, not more dangerous. But as she watched through the observation window, she realized that Zithrak was partly right. The Shadow Maw was indeed more active. It was moving around its cell with purpose instead of desperate pacing, examining the walls and ceiling as if seeing them clearly for the first time. "The changes will be reversed immediately," Zithrak continued, "and you are banned from all high-security areas. Your clearance is revoked, effective now." 2 security officers escorted Sarah back to the lower levels of the station. As they walked, she could hear Zithrak ordering his technicians to restore the original environmental settings and increase the containment field strength by 20%. Back in her quarters, Sarah sat on her narrow bed and felt tears of frustration running down her face. She had been so close to proving that the Shadow Maw could be helped. The creature had been responding to her changes, showing signs of intelligence and even gratitude. But now the Rex were going to make its prison even worse than before. They would increase the painful radiation, restore the constant harsh lighting, and probably add additional restrictions to make sure no one could help the creature again. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She kept thinking about the patterns the Shadow Maw had carved into its walls, the careful way it had handled the small gifts she had left, and the almost human intelligence she had seen in its movements. Somewhere above her, a living being was suffering because no one else would listen to what it was trying to communicate. The greatest xenobiologist in the galaxy had studied it for 300 years and seen only a monster. But Sarah had seen an artist, a mathematician, and a person trapped in a nightmare. She might have lost her access to the high-security areas, but she had not lost her determination. There had to be another way to help the Shadow Maw. She just had to find it. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah made herself a promise. She would not give up on the creature in Cell 7. Somehow, she would find a way to prove that the galaxy's most dangerous monster was actually its most misunderstood prisoner. The Vrex might have more advanced technology and thousands of years of experience, but they had never learned the most important lesson of working with living beings. Sometimes, the greatest breakthroughs came not from superior knowledge, but from simple compassion. 2 days after Sarah's ban from the high-security areas. She was scrubbing the floors in the lower-level cafeteria when the first explosion shook the station. The lights flickered, and emergency alarms began wailing throughout Kepler Station. Sarah dropped her mop and looked around in confusion as other workers stopped what they were doing to stare at the ceiling. "Attention all personnel." Commander Zithrak's voice crackled over the communication system. "We have a containment breach in the high-security wing. All staff are to evacuate to designated safety areas immediately." This is not a drill. Sarah's blood turned to ice. A containment breach could mean only one thing. One of the dangerous creatures had escaped. But which one? And how? She followed the stream of panicked workers toward the emergency assembly areas, but her mind was racing. The timing was too much of a coincidence. Just 2 days after they had increased the containment field strength around the Shadowmaw cell, something had gone wrong. As they reached the main corridor, Sarah saw Vrek's security teams running past with weapons drawn. Through the station's windows, she could see emergency lights flashing in the high-security sections. Whatever had escaped was still up there, somewhere in the maze of corridors and laboratories. "Sarah!" One of her fellow human workers grabbed her arm. "Come on, we need to get to the escape pods. They're saying it's the shadow creature, the one from Cell 7. Sarah felt her heart stop. The Shadowmaw was loose. She followed the crowd toward the escape pod bays, but her mind was working frantically. The creature had never tried to escape before, even when it had the chance. What had changed? What had driven it to break out now? As they waited in the crowded assembly area, more information came through the emergency broadcasts. The Shadowmaw had somehow overloaded its containment field during the morning feeding cycle. The feedback had caused a power surge that damaged other containment systems throughout the high-security wing. But that was not the worst part. The creature was not just wandering randomly through the station. According to the security reports, it was moving with purpose, heading deeper into the facility's core systems. 3 Vrek's researchers had already been killed when they encountered it in the corridors. "The creature appears to be heading for the main reactor," Zithrak announced grimly. "If it reaches the power core and damages the reactor shielding, the radiation release could destroy half the station. All personnel are ordered to evacuate immediately." Sarah watched through the assembly area windows as the first escape pods began launching. Small ships carrying frightened workers shot away from the station into empty space. The evacuation was proceeding quickly, but there were hundreds of people aboard Kepler Station. "Prepare for emergency station destruction," Zithrak's voice continued. "If we cannot recapture the creature within 1 hour, we will detonate the station's self-destruct system to prevent it from escaping into space." The announcement sent a wave of panic through the assembly area. People began pushing toward the remaining escape pods, desperate to get away before the station was destroyed. But Sarah could not move. She stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, thinking about what Zithrak had said. The Shadowmaw was heading for the reactor core. Why would it do that? What possible reason could it have? Unless it was not trying to destroy the station at all, Sarah thought about the creature's behavior over the past weeks. It had never shown random destructive tendencies. Every action had been purposeful, intelligent. When it had carved patterns on its walls, they had been mathematical and precise. When it had handled the small gifts she left, it had been careful and deliberate. What if the Shadowmaw was not trying to reach the reactor to destroy it? What if it was trying to reach something else? Sarah remembered her study of the station's layout. The reactor core was in the center of the facility, but it was surrounded by other important systems. The main computer core, the atmospheric processors, the gravity generators, and the station's original observation deck. The old observation deck had been abandoned years ago when they built the newer facilities. It was one of the few places on the station with minimal lighting and electromagnetic interference. For a creature that had evolved in the dark matter storms of space, it might seem like the closest thing to home. The Shadow Maw was not trying to destroy the station. It was trying to find a place where it could exist without constant pain. Sarah looked around at the panicking crowds, at the escape pods launching one after another, at the security teams preparing to evacuate. In 1 hour, they would destroy the station and everything on it. Hundreds of rare creatures from across the galaxy would die, along with the Shadow Maw that was only trying to find peace. She could not let that happen. While everyone else was focused on getting to the escape pods, Sarah slipped away from the assembly area. She knew the station's layout well after weeks of cleaning duties, and she knew the maintenance corridors that the security teams might overlook. Her plan was simple and probably suicidal. She would find the Shadow Maw before the security teams did, and she would try to communicate with it. If she was right about the creature's intelligence and intentions, maybe she could guide it to safety before the station was destroyed. If she was wrong, she would probably die. But she could not stand by and watch the destruction of something she believed was not a monster, but a frightened and misunderstood being. Sarah made her way through the empty corridors toward the station's core. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and the constant alarms made it hard to think clearly. She could hear weapons fire in the distance as security teams encountered the creature somewhere in the maze of passages. As she climbed through a maintenance shaft toward the central sections, Sarah tried to prepare herself for what she might find. The Shadow Maw in its cell had been terrifying enough. A frightened and desperate Shadow Maw loose in the station would be 100 times more dangerous, but she had to try. In her heart, she believed the creature was not evil or mindlessly violent. It was just a living being that had been driven to desperation by centuries of pain and isolation. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, the galaxy's most feared monster was looking for a place to rest. Sarah was going to help it find one, or die trying. Sarah found the trail of destruction in Corridor 7G. The metal walls showed long gashes where something with very sharp claws had passed by. Emergency panels sparked with damaged wiring, and the normal lighting had been completely destroyed, leaving only the dim red glow of backup systems. But as Sarah studied the damage more carefully, she realized it was not random violence. The claw marks followed a specific pattern along the walls, almost like the creature was feeling its way through unfamiliar territory. The damaged electrical panels were all related to lighting and electromagnetic systems, exactly the things that would cause the Shadow Maw pain. The creature was not destroying the station out of rage. It was trying to turn off the sources of its suffering. Following the trail, Sarah made her way deeper into the station's core areas. The emergency alarms were quieter here, muffled by the heavy walls designed to protect the central systems. She could hear weapons fire echoing from other corridors as security teams searched the wrong areas. Sarah's guess had been correct. The Shadow Maw was not heading for the reactor to destroy it. The trail led past the reactor bay and continued toward the abandoned sections of the station. She found the creature in the old observation deck. Just as she had hoped, the large circular room had been built in the early days of the station as a place for researchers to study the stars. Its walls were lined with darkened windows that looked out into deep space, and its lighting systems had been shut down years ago. When the area was abandoned, the Shadow Maw had found the darkest corner of the room and was trying to make itself smaller. For the first time since Sarah had started observing it, the creature was fully solid and visible. It looked exhausted, hurt, and terrified. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment, hardly breathing. Without the constant electromagnetic interference of its cell, she could see the Shadow Maw clearly. It was roughly humanoid, about 8 feet tall, with long arms and legs that seemed designed for moving through three-dimensional space rather than walking on flat ground. Its skin looked like living shadow, dark but somehow textured, and its head was elongated with large eyes that seemed designed for seeing in very dim light. The most shocking thing was the scars. The creature's body was covered with burn marks and raw patches where the containment field had injured it over the centuries. Some of the wounds looked fresh, probably from its escape through the heavily shielded corridors. As Sarah watched, the Shadow Maw made that same low singing sound she had heard in its cell. But now she could hear it clearly, and she realized it was not just one note repeated over and over. It was a complex melody, almost like a lullaby or a mourning song. The creature was grieving. Sarah took a slow step into the room, her hands raised to show she was not carrying any weapons. The Shadow Maw's large eyes fixed on her immediately, and its body tensed as if preparing to phase away or defend itself. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, though she knew the creature probably could not understand her words. "I'm not going to hurt you. I know you're scared." She sat down on the floor about 20 feet away from the creature, making herself as non-threatening as possible. This was something she had learned working with traumatized animals on Earth. Sometimes, the best way to help was simply to be present without demanding anything. The Shadow Maw watched her warily, but it did not attack or try to escape. After a few minutes, it began to relax slightly. The rigid tension in its body eased, and it returned to its soft, mournful singing. Sarah listened to the melody and found herself humming along quietly. She had always been good with music, and the creature's song had a mathematical structure that reminded her of whale songs or bird calls. It was definitely communication, not just random noise. When the Shadow Maw heard her humming, it stopped its own song and stared at her in what looked like amazement. Then, very carefully, it repeated a few notes of its melody and waited. Sarah hummed the same notes back to it. For the next several minutes, they continued this simple musical conversation. The creature would sing a phrase, and Sarah would repeat it back. Gradually, the Shadow Maw began to move closer, until it was sitting only a few feet away from her. Up close, Sarah could see that the creature's eyes were not just large, but incredibly expressive. There was intelligence there, and pain, and something that looked very much like hope. "They've been hurting you," Sarah said gently. "For hundreds of years, they've been keeping you in a place that causes you pain. You're not a monster at all, are you? You're just scared and hurt and trying to find somewhere safe." The Shadow Maw tilted its head as if trying to understand her words. Then it did something that took Sarah's breath away. It reached out one long clawed hand and very gently touched her face. The touch was cold but careful, like a person trying to determine if something was real. The creature examined Sarah's features with obvious curiosity, then drew back and began singing again. This time, the melody was different, lighter, almost happy. Sarah was so absorbed in her interaction with the Shadow Maw that she did not hear the footsteps in the corridor outside. The first she knew of Commander Zithrak's arrival was when emergency lighting flooded the observation deck and armed security officers poured into the room. "Get away from it immediately," Zithrak shouted, his weapon trained on the Shadow Maw. "The creature is extremely dangerous." The sudden lights and noise sent the Shadow Maw into a panic. It immediately began phasing in and out of visibility, its form becoming unstable as it prepared to flee or fight. But instead of attacking the security team, it moved to place itself between them and Sarah, as if trying to protect her. "Don't shoot," Sarah yelled, scrambling to her feet. "It's not trying to hurt anyone. It's scared." "The creature has killed 3 researchers," Zithrak snarled. "It is heading for the reactor core to destroy the station. Move away so we can contain it." "You're wrong." Sarah stood her ground, even though the armed Vrex could easily kill her along with the Shadow Maw. "It's not trying to destroy anything. It was looking for a place without electromagnetic radiation. The containment field was torturing it." Behind her, the Shadow Maw had stopped phasing and was watching the confrontation with obvious intelligence. Sarah could feel its presence, calm now that she was between it and the weapons. "Look at it," Sarah continued desperately. "Really look at it. Does it seem like a mindless killer to you? It's injured, exhausted, and frightened. The only reason it fought your people was because they were trying to force it back into a prison that causes constant pain." Zithrak hesitated, his weapon still raised. For the first time, he seemed to really see the Shadow Maw as something other than a monster. The creature was clearly intelligent, obviously in pain, and making no aggressive moves despite being cornered. "The containment protocols have worked for 300 years, Zithrak said, but his voice was less certain. "The containment protocols have been slowly killing it for 300 years, Sarah replied. "You've been trying to cage a creature that evolved in the vacuum of space by keeping it in a box, full of electromagnetic radiation. It's like trying to keep a fish in a furnace." The Shadow Maw made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and Sarah felt its hand touch her shoulder gently. The creature was trusting her to speak for it, to help the others understand what it could not say in words they knew. "Give me a chance to prove it," Sarah said. "Let me work with the Shadow Maw in an environment that doesn't cause it pain. If I'm wrong, you can always go back to the old containment methods. But if I'm right, you'll have learned something that could change how we interact with dangerous species across the galaxy." Zithrak looked at his security team, then back at Sarah and the Shadow Maw. The creature had wrapped its long arms around itself in a gesture that looked remarkably like a person trying to stay warm. It was hard to see it as a threat when it looked so vulnerable. "1 week, Zithrak said finally, lowering his weapon. "You have 1 week to prove your theories." But the first sign of aggression from the creature, and we returned to standard containment procedures. Sarah felt tears of relief running down her face. Behind her, the Shadow Maw began to sing again, but this time, the melody was one she had never heard before. It sounded like gratitude. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the redesigned habitat that had replaced the Shadow Maw's old cell. The space was large and dark, with carefully controlled lighting that mimicked the natural rhythms of deep space. The electromagnetic fields were minimal, just enough to prevent escape, but not enough to cause pain. The Shadow Maw, who Sarah had learned to call Echo after its love of musical communication, was creating another one of its mathematical wall carvings. But now it was working with proper tools and materials, creating art that alien mathematicians across the galaxy were studying with amazement. Echo had turned out to be not just intelligent, but brilliant. It had knowledge of physics and mathematics that came from spending millions of years evolving in the strange environment of dark matter storms. When it was healthy and comfortable, it was eager to share what it knew. The success with Echo had led to Sarah being promoted to head of a new department, interspecies communication and rehabilitation. Her methods were being tried with untamable creatures throughout the galaxy, and the results were consistently successful.